It was a quiet evening in the suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek, a place where the streets were lined with perfectly manicured lawns and identical houses that seemed to stretch on forever. The kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, and yet no one really knew anyone at all. It was the kind of place where the Homeowners Association, HOA, ruled with an iron fist, and no one dared to question their authority. At least, not until now. Tom Reynolds had lived in Willow Creek for 5 years, and for 5 years, he had endured the constant harassment from the HOA. It started smell a warning about his grass being an inch too high, a citation for leaving his trash cans out a few minutes too long. But over time, the HOA's demands became more ridiculous, more intrusive. They fined him for the color of his front door, for the type of flowers he planted in his garden, and even for the way he parked his car in his own driveway. Tom was a patient man, but even he had his limits. And when the HOA turned their attention to his fence, he knew it was time to draw the line. The fence in question was a sturdy, well-built structure that Tom had installed himself. It was perfectly legal, and it provided much-needed privacy from his nosy neighbors. But according to the HOA, it was an eyesore, a violation of their precious community standards. They demanded that he tear it down, and when Tom refused, they escalated their threats. The HOA president, a man named Richard Grayson, was the ringleader of this madness. A retired accountant with a Napoleon complex, Grayson strutted around the neighborhood like he owned the place, barking orders at homeowners and handing out citations like they were parking tickets. He had a small group of loyal followers, mostly retirees with too much time on their hands, who followed him around like a pack of obedient dogs, ready to do his bidding. Tom had tried to reason with Grayson, but the man was impossible to deal with. He was arrogant, self-righteous, and completely unwilling to listen to anyone else's point of view. So, when Grayson showed up at Tom's door one evening with a stack of citations and a smug grin on his face, Tom knew that things were about to come to a head. The confrontation was brief but intense. Grayson stood on Tom's doorstep, flanked by his two most loyal enforcers, a sour-faced man named Harold and a wiry, military stiff retiree named Frank. Grayson held up the stack of citations like a badge of honor, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, his tone mocking, "you've ignored our warnings. This fence violates HOA code. You need to remove it immediately." Tom crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "Richard, I built that fence for privacy. I followed every regulation. This is harassment." Grayson's smirk widened. "You're in violation," he said, his tone mocking. "Last warning." Tom felt his patience snap. He took a step forward, staring Grayson down. "Then take me to court." For the first time, Grayson's smirk faltered. He hadn't expected resistance. He was used to people folding under pressure, but Tom wasn't most people. And he sure as hell wasn't backing down. Grayson's face darkened, his jaw tightening. He hesitated for a second before hissing, "Fine. But don't say we didn't warn you." And with that, he turned on his heel and marched off, Harold and Frank scurrying after him like obedient little rats. Tom watched them go, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Then, without another word, he slammed the door shut. His dog, a massive 90-kilogram Rottweiler named Max, huffed and laid his head back down. But Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Because for the first time in this whole war with the HOA, Grayson hadn't made a threat. He'd made a promise. A week passed with no more warnings, no more notices, no more HOA patrols stalking past Tom's house, like vultures waiting for something to die. Just silence. And that's what made Tom nervous. Richard Grayson wasn't the type to let things go. No, that self-important little dictator had been humiliated, and men like him didn't forget. They plotted. Tom had stood his ground, told them to take him to court, slammed the door in their faces. That should have been the end of it. But deep down, Tom knew better. Grayson had power, or at least he thought he did. The HOA was his little empire, and Tom had just spit in the king's face. There was no way the man wasn't scheming some kind of revenge. Still, the waiting was worse than the fight. Every day that passed without a letter, a fine, or a smug remark from one of the HOA enforcers, Tom's paranoia grew. He found himself checking the security cameras more often, scanning the street whenever he took out the trash, waiting for the next move. But nothing came. Until it did. It was 2:13 a.m. When Tom shot awake, his entire body tensed like a coiled spring. At first, he wasn't sure what had woken him. His brain was still fogged with sleep, his heart pounding. Then it came in a deep, sickening crack. Wood splintering. The front door. Someone was kicking at his goddamn door. Adrenaline hit him like a hammer, shocking his system fully awake. His mind snapped into fight mode before his body could even catch up. No hesitation, no second-guessing. He reached under the bed and yanked out the Lewis V.Y. Lee Slugger, his old baseball bat, heavy and solid from years of use. His fingers curled around the smooth, worn wood, his blood roaring in his ears as he pushed out of bed, moving through the darkness on pure instinct. Another thunderous crack echoed through the house. Then, boom. The door exploded inward, ripped from its hinges with a final, violent kick. The crash sent a shock wave through the house, the sound reverberating in Tom's chest as a gust of cold night air rushed in. The metallic clang of the deadbolt hitting the floor sent a spike of rage through him. Then, shuffling voices. Heavy boots on his floor. They were inside. Tom moved like a predator, creeping through the hallway, his grip on the bat tightening, muscles coiled, ready to swing. He reached the Lee room just in time to see three figures silhouetted in the entryway, moving fast. For a split second, his brain struggled to catch up with reality. These weren't burglars. It wasn't some random home invasion. It was the HOA patrol. Harold, Frank, and Richard Grayson. Tom stopped dead, disbelief crashing over him like a tidal wave. They actually did it. These grown-ass men, these senior citizens, had just kicked in his goddamn door. And they weren't looting. They weren't ransacking his house. They were looking for the fence. Grayson's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, like he was leading some kind of military operation. Tear it down. Tom's stomach dropped. This wasn't about rules anymore. This wasn't about fines or citations or neighborhood aesthetics. This was war. Grayson wasn't just trying to enforce some stupid HOA code. He was here to break Tom. To prove a point. To show that no one defied the HOA and got away with it. Harold and Frank lurched forward, heading toward the backyard door, fumbling with the locks, moving with urgency. They actually thought they could get away with this. That's when the growl rumbled through the darkness. Low, deep, dangerous. A sound that cut through the chaos like a blade, chilling and primal. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. Tom's body went still, every nerve firing at once. Max, the Rottweiler, emerged from the shadows like a fury unleashed. 90 kilograms of pure muscle and controlled aggression. His massive frame moved with lethal grace, his dark coat barely visible in the dim light, except for the flash of white teeth as his lips curled back in a silent snarl. Harold froze mid-step, his face draining of color. Frank stumbled back, hands up as if that would somehow stop what was coming. Grayson, for the first time in his miserable, power-hungry life, looked like a man who had just realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his existence. Max didn't bark. He didn't growl. He launched. 1 second, Harold was standing there, frozen like a deer in headlights. The next, 90 kilograms of raw power and rage collided with him like a battering ram. The impact was brutal. A strangled, almost inhuman scream tore from Harold's throat as he crashed onto the hardwood floor, airily VYing his lungs in a sharp, panicked gasp. His clipboard went flying, his glasses skidded across the room, his arms flailed, but it was useless. Max was already on him, massive paws pinning him down, his broad chest heaving with barely contained aggression. The dog's hot breath puffed against Harold's face, fangs mere inches from his throat. Harold didn't move. Couldn't. Frank, standing just a few feet away, had half a second to react. He did exactly what any weak-blooded coward would do. He ran. Or at least, he tried. He managed 2 stumbling steps before Max turned on him. The dog moved like lightning, a blur of muscle and instinct. His jaws clamped down on Frank's wrist, locking around flesh and bone like a steel trap. Frank shrieked. It wasn't a yelp. It wasn't a shout. It was a full-blown scream, the kind that clawed up from deep inside a man's gut when he realized he was utterly powerless. Max gave a single sharp yank, and Frank's knees buckled instantly. His body hit the floor with a thud, his free hand slapping at the wood in desperate submission. His eyes were wide, his face contorted in pure, white-hot terror. And Grayson? Grayson did what all cowards do when the tables turn. He ran. No hesitation, no attempt to help his men. He bolted for the door, tripping over his own feet in his rush to escape. Tom heard the front gate slam open, followed by the rapid, uncoordinated pounding of dress shoes on pavement. Tom flicked on the lights. Instantly, the room was flooded with harsh yellow light, revealing the full scene. Harold, sprawled out and wheezing under Max's crushing weight. Frank, writhing on the floor, his wrist still trapped in Max's VYC grip. And Tom, standing over them, baseball bat still gripped tight in his hand, his expression a mixture of rage, disbelief, and dark amusement. He exhaled sharply, his voice low and controlled. Max Holt. The transformation was instantaneous. The massive Rottweiler, seconds ago a furious, unrelenting war machine, froze. His jaws unlocked, but his teeth hovered dangerously close to Frank's skin. His body remained rigid, his entire being still coiled like a loaded spring. But he did not move. He was waiting for further instruction. Tom barely spared them a glance before shifting his gaze to Harold. The old man was still struggling to breathe, his chest heaving, face red, eyes darting wildly like a trapped animal. Tom took a single step forward. Harold flinched. "You just broke into my house," Tom said, his voice calm. "Too calm. That's a felony." Harold swallowed hard, still pinned beneath 90 kilograms of unblinking judgment. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Then, finally, a shaky whisper. We thought you weren't home." Tom scoffed, his lips curling into something cold and sharp, like the edge of a blade before it cuts deep. "And that makes breaking in okay?" Harold had no answer. Neither did Frank. The two men just laid there, the realization slowly sinking in. They had walked into a nightmare of their own making, and now there was no way out. From outside, Grayson's voice rang out, panicked but desperate to maintain control. "We were enforcing HOA rules." Tom turned his head toward the open door, his eyes locking on Grayson, who was standing at the edge of Tom's property, just close enough to bark orders, but far enough to stay out of reach. "Coward." Tom stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "You broke into my house," he said, his voice like gravel and steel. "Over a damn fence." Grayson's mouth opened, maybe to justify, maybe to dig himself even deeper. Then he ran. Flat out ran down the street like a scared little rat, his shoes slapping against the pavement, his jacket flapping behind him. Tom watched him go, exhaling through his nose. For now, his gaze dropped back down to Harold and Frank. Harold looked seconds away from passing out. Frank was cradling his wrist, sucking in pained gasps. Tom tilted his head slightly. Then, after a pause just long enough for them to feel the full weight of their failure, he said, almost conversationally, "Hope you like lawsuits." By the time the sun cracked over the horizon, red and gold spilling across the sky like fire, the flashing blue and red lights of two patrol cars had already painted Tom's front yard in chaos. The cops were here, and Harold and Frank, they were sitting on the curb, handcuffed, looking like two washed-up criminals who had just realized the heist went sideways. Harold had his head down, muttering to himself, his wrinkled face pale with exhaustion and dread. His once crisp polo was filthy, his glasses bent and clinging to the very edge of his nose. Frank was sitting as still as a corpse, cradling his wrist like a wounded animal, eyes glazed over as if mentally checking out of reality. His damn clipboard lay beside him on the pavement, a cracked relic of his former self-importance. And Grayson? Gone. That spineless bastard was nowhere to be found. Not on the curb, not in the street, not even answering his phone when the cops tried calling. Of course, he was gone. Of course, he had left his so-called enforcers behind to deal with the fallout alone. Tom stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching as Officer DeVys, a seasoned cop with the kind of weary expression that said he had seen some real stupid in his time, walked up the steps, notebook in hand. DeVys gave Tom a long look. Then his eyes drifted down to Max, who was sitting calmly at Tom's feet, licking his paws like he hadn't just turned two grown men into chew toys a few hours ago. "So," DeVys stalled, tapping his pen against the page. You're telling me they kicked your door in, broke into your house, and started marching toward your backyard like a bunch of deranged old-school repo men? Yep, Tom said flatly. DeVys raised an eyebrow. And you let your dog handle the situation? Tom patted Max's massive head. Seemed like the logical choice. DeVys stared at him for a beat. Then, to Tom's absolute delight, the cop smirked. Good dog. Tom snorted. That's what I said. Behind them, Harold let out a pitiful noise, something between a groan and a whimper. Tom turned his attention back to the curb. He could feel their stares on him, two pairs of panicked, pleading eyes silently begging for mercy. He let the silence stretch just long enough for them to squirm. Then finally, he exhaled, steady and controlled, and said for words that made their faces drain of all remaining color. I'm pressing charges. Harold V.Y. Sibley sagged, his expression collapsing into pure defeat. Frank's mouth opened and closed, his brain clearly scrambling for some last-ditch excuse, but there wasn't one. They had broken into a man's house. They had kicked in his damn door. And now, they were about to pay the price. DeVys gave a single satisfied nod, flipping his notebook closed. Damn right you are. He turned to his partner, a younger officer standing near the patrol car, arms resting lazily on his belt. We're booking them for breaking and entering, trespassing, and destruction of private property. He flicked his gaze to Frank's pathetic, shaking wrist. Might want to add resisting arrest, considering he didn't go down easy. The younger cop stifled a laugh. Harold whimpered again. Tom had to bite his cheek to keep from grinning. A few minutes later, the officers hauled Harold and Frank to their feet not gently. Either end guided them toward the patrol car. The door slammed shut, the engine rumbled, and as the police car rolled away down the street, Tom finally let himself breathe. It should have felt like the end. It should have felt like V.Y. Tory. But as the red and blue lights faded into the distance and the early morning settled over the wreckage of his front door, Tom's jaw tightened. This wasn't over. Because Richard Grayson, that cowardly, power-hungry little bastard, was still out there. Tom woke up the next morning feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Harold and Frank were in cuffs, hauled off like common criminals, and his house was finally quiet again. Sure, his front door looked like it had been hit by a battering ram, but it was nothing a quick Home Depot run couldn't fix. He had his coffee in one hand, phone in the other, and for the first time in this whole war with the HOA, he felt like he'd won. That feeling lasted exactly 3 minutes. Because then his phone dinged. A new email from the HOA. Tom took a slow sip of coffee before clicking it open, already bracing for the stupidity. Dear Mr. Reynolds, it has come to our attention that your property is in violation of HOA regulations regarding dangerous animals. Your failure to control and restrain a violent canine has resulted in an unsafe environment for the neighborhood. Effective immediately, the HOA is pursuing legal action against you for harboring a dangerous animal. Failure to comply with HOA mandates may result in fines, legal fees, and removal of the aforementioned animal from the premises. Regards. Homeowners Association. Tom blinked. Then he read it again. Then he laughed out loud, a full-bellied, genuine laugh, the kind that starts deep in your chest and rips free like a reflex. They were really trying this. He almost admired the audacity. Almost. So let's get this straight. They broke into his house, kicked in his door, got mauled by his dog, and now they were suing him for what? Defending his home? It was so insultingly ridiculous that he had to set his coffee down before he spilled it. Max, lying nearby on his dog bed, perked up at the sound of his laugh, tilting his massive head like he, too, was wondering what kind of idiot would actually try this. Tom reached down, scratching the Rottweiler behind the ears. Congrats, buddy. You're officially public enemy number 1. Max huffed and flopped back down, completely unbothered. Tom, however, was very much bothered. He knew the HOA was corrupt. He knew they'd do anything to flex their little dictatorship over the neighborhood. But this was a new level of desperation. And the real kicker? Richard Grayson was missing. Word around the neighborhood was that he had gone into hiding. Tom had seen it himself. His car wasn't in the driveway. The lights in his house had been off for days. The man hadn't been spotted since the night of the break-in. And honestly, that only pissed Tom off more. Grayson had orchestrated the entire break-in, sent his little henchman to do the dirty work, and then vanished when it all went sideways. Now, instead of owning up to his crimes, he was hiding like a rat in the walls, letting the HOA handle his mess for him. It was pathetic. And it also meant one thing. Grayson knew he had screwed up. If he thought this lawsuit was going to scare Tom into backing down, he was in for a rude awakening. Because Tom was done playing defense. It was time to fight back. Tom didn't just hire a lawyer. He got the best. This wasn't about just beating the HOA. This was about burying them. The moment he got that laughable lawsuit accusing him of harboring a dangerous animal, he knew exactly how to respond. He didn't waste time. He made calls. He researched. And by the end of the day, he had a legal shark on his side, someone who made grown men cry in courtrooms and had a bulletproof record of tearing HOAs apart like cheap paper. Her name was Jessica Monroe, and she was the last person anyone wanted to see on the opposing side of a lawsuit. The moment she got involved, the HOA's case didn't just fall apart. It disintegrated. Tom barely had to lift a damn finger. Within days, the lawsuit against him was thrown out, not settled, not negotiated, thrown out. As in, so laughably weak that the judge barely let it see the inside of a courtroom. And the HOA? They didn't just lose. They got humiliated. But Tom, he was just getting started. Because while they were busy trying to make him the VY Lane, he had something much bigger planned. His lawsuit. And this wasn't just about getting revenge. This was about making sure these power-drunk, rule-obsessed maniacs never pulled this kind of crap again. The charges? Breaking and entering. Property damage. Harassment. Emotional distress. And for Richard Grayson specifically, negligence as an HOA president. Conspiring to commit criminal trespassing. Evading law enforcement. Grayson, Harold, and Frank were screwed. And the neighborhood knew it. The second word got out about the lawsuits, the entire HOA community erupted into chaos. People were talking. Some neighbors, mostly the ones who had blindly followed the HOA's every rule, without question defended the patrol, saying they were just trying to maintain order. Others? They were furious. And Tom couldn't blame them. For years, Grayson and his little group of enforcers had ruled the neighborhood like a pack of self-important tyrants, throwing fines around, bullying homeowners, and acting like they owned every damn property on the block. Now their dirty laundry was out in the open. But the absolute best part? The security footage. See, Tom had cameras. Good ones. And they had caught everything. The door getting kicked in. The three stooges marching inside like wannabe SWAT officers. The look on their faces when Max introduced himself. Harold and Frank screaming like they were in a horror movie. And, of course, Grayson running like a coward. Tom didn't leak the footage. Someone did. And once it hit the internet, it went viral overnight. Millions of people saw it. The comments were brutal. These old men thought they were the damn FBI. LMAO, bro straight up ran like he owed child support. Max did what the legal system failed to do. This is why HOAs need to be abolished. And just like that, Richard Grayson became the internet's newest meme. Tom had never seen karma work so fast. The lawsuit went to court. Tom had been waiting for this moment for weeks. He'd watched the HOA scramble, trying to cover their asses, throwing last-minute settlement offers his way, hoping he'd just take the money and go away. Not a chance. This wasn't just about winning. This was about setting fire to the little empire Grayson had built and watching the ashes blow away. And finally, after months of delays, legal maneuvering, and desperate attempts by the HOA to shift blame, the day arrived. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors, reporters, even a few random internet-famous lawyers who had been following the case since the security footage went viral. Everyone wanted to see how this would end. And then, at the very last second, he appeared. Richard Grayson. For the first time in months, he finally showed his face. But the smugness, the arrogance, the holier-than-thou superiority complex? Gone. The man who once strutted around the neighborhood like a self-appointed dictator now looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and his hands twitched every time he adjusted his tie. This wasn't the HOA president who used to bark orders at homeowners. This was a man who knew he had already lost. And then, to make it worse, Harold and Frank folded immediately. They barely made it past opening arguments before their lawyers stood up and muttered the two words that sealed their fate. Guilty, Your Honor. Tom almost laughed. No fight. No defense. Harold and Frank pled guilty to trespassing because what else could they do? There was VY Deo, EVY Denke of them literally kicking in a man's door. No jury in the world was going to listen to a defense that started with, "Well, Your Honor, we thought it was okay because the HOA didn't like his fence." They knew they were screwed, so they took the deal. But Grayson? Oh, Grayson tried. He tried to lie his way out. He tried to play the VY Tim. He tried to act like he was just following the rules, like he had no idea Harold and Frank were going to break into Tom's house. He tried to claim that he never authorized anything illegal. The judge wasn't buying it. Not for a second. The moment they played the security footage, Grayson's entire argument fell apart like a cheap suit in the ring. There he was, marching in, GIVYing orders. And there he was again, running like hell the moment things went sideways. When the VY Deo paused on his panicked, wide-eyed face mid-sprint, a few people in the courtroom actually laughed. Grayson shrunk in his seat. The judge looked at him over her glasses. "You have nothing to say for yourself, mister." Grayson. Grayson opened his mouth, probably to spout another excuse, but the judge held up a hand. "Save it." And then, just like that, the final verdict came down. HOA fine due law $250,000, $250,000 for negligence, harassment, and legal fees. A death sentence for their budget. Harold and Frank? Community SARE VYC. Not just a slap on the wrist. A full year of unpaid, court-mandated work for actual community programs. Tom grinned. Couldn't wait to see these two scooping trash off the highway in orange vests. And Grayson? He got it the worst. Stripped of his position. Banned from the HOA. Personally sued for damages. No more power. No more fines. No more HOA dictator leadership. The judge nailed the final coffin shut with one last sentence. You are permanently barred from holding any leadership position in any HOA. Translation? Grayson was done. Not just here, but everywhere. No HOA would ever let him hold power again. And just like that, it was over. Months passed. The seasons shifted. The air turned crisp, and the neighborhood finally felt like a place people actually wanted to live in, not some paranoid, happy dictatorship run by power-drunk retirees with too much time on their hands. For the first time in years, Tom could walk outside without wondering if some clipboard-wielding HOA enforcer was lurking nearby, waiting to slap him with a citation for a trash can being 1 inch out of place. There were no more HOA patrols. No more passive-aggressive warning letters. No more neighbors whispering about who Grayson was going after next. The HOA was reformed, completely gutted, and rebuilt from the ground up. Grayson's inner circle of rule-obsessed loyalists? Gone. The ridiculous fines, the unwritten rules, the constant harassment over minor infractions that no sane person would ever care about? A thing of the past. And the best part? No one missed it. The new leadership wasn't perfect, but at least they were reasonable human beings, not a bunch of wannabe tyrants micromanaging everyone's lives. The first thing they did was get rid of the patrols. Because, let's be honest, the idea of a group of elderly volunteers prowling the neighborhood like the world's least intimidating SWAT team had always been ridiculous. The second thing? They sent apology letters. Actual, formal letters of apology to every homeowner who had been targeted under Grayson's reign of terror. Tom got his in the mail one morning, skimmed it over, and laughed when he reached the end. We acknowledge that past leadership overstepped their authority in several instances. We regret any undue stress this may have caused. Understatement of the year. He almost framed it. But the best part of it all? Grayson was gone. Vanished. Erased from existence like a bad memory. No one had seen him since the lawsuit ended. Some people said he'd packed up and moved to another state, desperate to start fresh somewhere where people hadn't seen him sprinting for his life on VY security footage. Others swore he was hiding out with relatives, too humiliated to show his face in public. One neighbor, an old guy named Hank who had never liked the HOA to begin with, claimed he'd spotted Grayson at a grocery store 2 towns over, looking shifty and paranoid, glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to tackle him in the cereal aisle. Tom liked to imagine that Grayson had to check his mailbox every morning in fear, wondering if yet another lawsuit was coming his way. But honestly, it didn't matter where he was, because he was never coming back. He had lost everything. His position, his power, his ability to control anyone ever again. And Tom had won. So now, for the first time in forever, life was simple, peaceful. Tom sat in his backyard, stretched out in his favorite lawn chair, sipping an ice-cold beer, feeling the late afternoon sun warm his skin. The wind rustled gently through the trees, the distant hum of a lawnmower carried through the air, and for once, there was no tension, no stress, no creeping sense of HOA-fueled dread. Max lay in the grass beside him, chewing contentedly on a bone the size of a damn baseball bat, a reward for being the best damn home security system money could never buy. His massive paws gripped the bone, his powerful jaws working it over, his tail flicking lazily in satisfaction. Tom reached down, scratching him behind the ears. "You did good, buddy." Max didn't bother looking up, just let out a low, contented huff, and kept chewing. Tom took another sip of beer. No more harassment. No more threats. No more HOA dictators knocking on his door, thinking they owned his damn property. Just peace. And one very, very good dog. As the days turned into weeks, the neighborhood of Willow Creek began to heal. The shadow of the HOA's tyranny had lifted, and people started to reclaim their lives. The new HOA board, led by a more reasonable and transparent group of homeowners, worked to rebuild trust. They held open meetings, listened to residents' concerns, and implemented changes that actually benefited the community. Tom, however, remained vigilant. He knew that even though Grayson was gone, the scars of his reign would take time to fade. He continued to keep an eye on the neighborhood, not out of paranoia, but out of a sense of responsibility. He had become something of a local hero, the man who had stood up to the HOA and won. People would stop him on the street to thank him, and some even asked for advice on how to handle their own HOA disputes. One evening, as Tom was walking Max around the block, he noticed a for sale sign in front of Grayson's old house. He paused, staring at the empty property. The house looked abandoned, the lawn overgrown, and the windows dark. It was a stark contrast to the rest of the neighborhood, which was thriving. "Guess he's not coming back," Tom muttered to Max, who sniffed the air curiously. As they continued their walk, Tom couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Grayson was gone, and the neighborhood was better for it. But there was still one loose end that needed to be tied up. A few weeks later, Tom received a letter in the mail. It was from a law firm representing Richard Grayson. The letter stated that Grayson was willing to settle the remaining lawsuits out of court. Pro V. Dead Tom agreed to drop all charges and refrain from further legal action. Tom read the letter twice, then set it down on the kitchen table. He wasn't surprised. Grayson was desperate to put this behind him, and a settlement was his last-ditch effort to salvage what little dignity he had left. But Tom wasn't interested in settling. He had come too far to let Grayson off the hook now. He picked up the phone and called Jessica Monroe, his lawyer. "Jessica, I just got a letter from Grayson's lawyers. They want to settle." Jessica chuckled on the other end of the line. "Of course they do. They know they're screwed. What do you want to do?" Tom leaned back in his chair, staring at the letter. "I want to see this through to the end. No settlements. No deals. I want Grayson to face the consequences of what he's done." Jessica's voice was firm. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll take him to court and make sure he pays for every last bit of damage he's caused." Tom nodded, even though Jessica couldn't see him. "Good. Let's finish this." The trial was set for a month later, and the courtroom was packed once again. This time, Grayson was there in person, looking even more haggard than before. His suit was ill-fitting, his hair was grayer, and his eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. He knew he was fighting a losing battle, but he was determined to go down swinging. The prosecution laid out their case methodically, presenting evidence of Grayson's negligence, harassment, and conspiracy to commit criminal trespassing. They played the security footage again, and the courtroom erupted in murmurs as Grayson's panicked face filled the screen. When it was Grayson's turn to take the stand, he tried to defend himself, but his arguments were weak and unconvincing. He claimed that he had only been trying to enforce the rules for the good of the community, but under cross-examination, his lies unraveled. Jessica Monroe was relentless. She tore apart his excuses one by one, exposing the truth behind his actions. By the time she was done, Grayson was a broken man, slumped in his chair, his face pale and sweaty. The jury didn't take long to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Grayson to a hefty fine, community service, and a permanent ban from holding any position of authority in any HOA. As the gavel came down, Grayson looked like he had aged another 10 years. He was led out of the courtroom in silence, his head bowed in defeat. Tom watched him go, feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. It was over. Grayson had finally been held accountable for his actions, and the neighborhood could move on. With Grayson's trial behind him, Tom focused on rebuilding his life. He repaired his front door, planted new flowers in his garden, and even installed a new fence, this time with the full approval of the new HOA board. Max, of course, was by his side every step of the way, his loyal companion and protector. The neighborhood continued to thrive, and the sense of community grew stronger. People were more willing to speak up and stand up for their rights, knowing that they had the power to make a difference. The new HOA board worked hard to ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated, and they made a conscious effort to be transparent and fair. One evening, as Tom sat on his porch with Max, he reflected on everything that had happened. It had been a long and difficult journey, but it had been worth it. He had stood up to a tyrant, fought for his rights, and come out stronger on the other side. Max let out a contented sigh, resting his massive head on Tom's lap. Tom scratched him behind the ears, a small smile playing on his lips. "We did good, buddy," he said softly. "We did good." Years passed, and the story of Tom Reynolds and his fight against the HOA became legend in Willow Creek. It was a tale of courage, resilience, and the power of standing up for what's right. People would tell the story to their children, using it as a lesson about the importance of community and the dangers of unchecked authority. Tom, now older and wiser, continued to live a quiet life in the neighborhood he had fought so hard to protect. He remained active in the community, always willing to lend a hand or offer advice to those who needed it. Max, though slowing down with age, was still by his side, a constant reminder of the bond they shared. One day, as Tom was walking through the neighborhood, he noticed a new family moving into Grayson's old house. They were young and full of energy, their laughter filling the air as they unloaded boxes from a moving truck. Tom watched them for a moment, a sense of hope swelling in his chest. The neighborhood had come a long way since the days of Grayson's tyranny. It was a place where people could live freely, without fear of harassment or oppression. And as Tom looked around at the thriving community, he knew that his fight had been worth it. He turned to Max, who was sniffing the air curiously. "Come on, buddy," he said with a smile. "Let's go home." And with that, they walked off into the sunset, the legacy of their fight living on in the hearts of the people of Willow Creek. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.